All right. Well, looks like we are just now at 12:30. So we've got a great presentation here with Nutanix and Jarian Gibson. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Jarian and take it away, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me today here at the Alchemy Solution Summit. I'm going to talk about Nutanix and go through our solution and how we can be multi-cloud, including private and public cloud for a hybrid cloud solution. With everything here today we talked about, Citrix and iGel and Ivanti, Numecit, we're going to be the stack underneath. And I'll talk about how that works with Citrix and Nutanix. So first thing we'll talk about is an introduction here, Nutanix overview, Nutanix and Citrix, how we integrate the tools that we can use, and then some questions towards the end. So my name is Jarian Gibson. Thank you, Jason, for the introduction. I work for Nutanix. I'm a staff solutions architect. I work on the EUC engineering team. And what I do within our team is I do a lot of testing. So when you go to Nutanix.com and you look at any of the guides out there for EUC, specifically Citrix on Nutanix, that's what I do. We do testing. We test releases of AOS, AHV, Windows, Citrix virtual apps and desktops. Anytime there's a change, we go through and test, see how it impacts performance. And then if there's any major impact, we see how we can tweak our platform. I also test things like files with Citrix. And other parts of our solutions I'll talk about. You can follow me at Jarian Gibson. I'm a CGC leader, and I'm also a Citrix technology professional as well. So kind of a Nutanix overview here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is our typical EUC building blocks. And we kind of saw the earlier presenters from iGel being the endpoint and managing the endpoint and the client access, Citrix being the broker and the protocol, and then Numecit with application delivery, and then Ivanti to manage the persona and performance of the user sessions. So kind of think about that stack where you see kind of the top part of this picture, and that's where the other technology partners that presented fit in those areas there. We'll look at the bottom half of this where it starts with virtualization, server, storage, data protection, network, and security. That's where Nutanix comes in. And again, this can be private cloud in your data center, public cloud, and Microsoft Azure or Microsoft Azure, Google, GCP, AWS as well. And I'll talk about how we can stretch across all that for a hybrid cloud experience in this presentation. But as you look at, when you're looking at your server hardware, your storage, your data protection, network security, usually it's going to be a group of vendors. It can be, up to several vendors. It can be complex to own, complex to knit together. You find a problem, within that stack, finger pointing goes on, you're playing the support tag. It can be expensive to scale. Performance, it can start out great, but once you get to the higher end of your deployment, you can see the performance start going down, and it's not usually end user focused. So where do we fit into the stack here? Well, like I talked about, we're going to be virtualization down through network security. And the first thing we're going to be is the foundation for enterprise clouds. And again, this can be public cloud, private cloud. It's a hybrid cloud experience. So we're going to have multi-cloud management, our application on top of that, your app automation and orchestration, your virtualization, your server, your data protection, your storage, and your networking. But instead of being those separate components, separate vendors, separate solutions, we're going to combine that all into a single solution at Nutanix. And again, this is going to be public cloud, private cloud for a hybrid cloud experience. So when we talk about performance and we talk about, you may start off with great performance, but as you scale, as you get into the higher end of your deployment, you may see to where you might have an issue with performance. You might have to buy additional hardware, re-architect, and so forth. One of the things that we do within the team that I work on, like I mentioned earlier, on the EUC engineering team, is that every time there's some kind of change, we test this. So this is not just a marketing slide. We actually go through and test. Again, there's a change in hypervisor version. We release a new AOS version. Citrix comes out with a new version of virtual apps and desktops. Windows 10 changes. New security patches come out. All those different things we go through and test to make sure that we get the same amount of users per node as we were with one node and going up to 32 nodes in a cluster. So again, we do have true linear scaling performance in your infrastructure. Typically, we start off with EUC with Citrix workloads with 3 nodes. And then after those first 3 nodes are deployed, you can go ahead and add a node at a time and start scaling out your deployment. So as you go with one node with 150 users to going to 3 nodes to 450 users to 6 nodes or 4 nodes with 600 users, you're going to have that same performance with 3 nodes as you get the 4th node, as you get to the 32nd node. So you'll see that performance, the response time and everything is going to be the same at day 1 as you are at day 365 in your deployment as you're ramping your users up in the solution. The next thing here is going to be files. This is a pretty big use case for a lot of our Citrix deployments. And so we're going to have a file server solution on the same cluster you deploy your workloads or remote cluster. The main thing here is going to be the same pane of glass management as you would with our infrastructure for the hypervisor, the storage, and everything else. All in a single pane of glass management. You can run the same cluster as your workloads, or you can run a remote cluster. Just like our clusters where you start out with 3 nodes, we start out with 3 file server VMs and scale those out or scale those up based on your requirements. That way you can distribute shares across those file server VMs for load balancing and also redundancy as well. So get rid of Windows file servers, get rid of third-party NAS storage devices, put everything into the Nutanix platform. Use cases there are going to be redirected profiles. We have customers using profile containers like FS Logics, VHD containers like app layering or user personalization layers, profile management, provisioning services, and if you're using share file storage zone connectors for on-prem storage, you can use that for the storage as well. The nice thing with files is that you get a terabyte free per cluster, and then as you need more storage, you can buy additional storage licensing from there. But you can get that 1 terabyte free to see how it works, to see how you can set up your provisioning services, Vita Store, your profiles, whatever. But then as you need to scale up, add more storage into the deployment. One thing we just released is our Files 3.7, which adds things like continuously available shares and tech preview. We also have some performance enhancements. And also, too, with our distributed shares, you can now distribute a folder at any level in the shared tree, so even making that even better from a files deployment. The next case is going to be flow, and this is going to be micro-segmentation. So with flow, you'll be able to control the traffic at a VM level. So say you have different use cases in your environments, one for maybe HR, one for management, one for, call center users. You can control it at the VM level, what they can talk to, secure and lock them down, and have visibility into the traffic of where they're going as well. That way you can secure that traffic, lock users down, making sure that their virtual machines are only talking to what needs to be talked to instead of going out and talking to third-party resources that they shouldn't have access to. The next one is going to be Calm. So we talked about app orchestration and automation. You can make blueprints, and this works with several different hypervisors: AHV, VMware vSphere, AWS, Azure, where you can do things like self-service portals. You can do automation and orchestration of deployments. So say you have a new deployment of Citrix, you can make a blueprint to deploy those components. You do image management as well, to where you can use it to a single VM type model and push that the image around with Calm now as well. So Calm is going to be that piece to help you automate and orchestrate, whether it's on Nutanix AHV, vSphere, or in the public cloud, and again, have that self-service portal. The next thing here is going to be Zyleap. So when we talk about our different deployment options, we have our private cloud in your data center, our public cloud using public cloud hardware. We also have a managed service for disaster recovery. So we have our own data centers, and what Zyleap is a managed service. So instead of you having to manage the hardware, manage the software underneath, you are just managing your VMs. And what you do is you set up recovery plans and protection policies. And within those, you can set up different order of how things boot, do script-based actions when they come up. But the main thing is that boot order, so you can do things based on dependencies. And so things boot up in the proper order instead of everything just booting up and you have them reboot things so they can talk properly to dependent components. Again, this is a managed service, and this works with Nutanix AHV, or VMware on Nutanix as well for vSphere/ESXi. But it's a one-click failover. So inside of Prism, you just click failover. It brings up your components on the other side, network IP mapping, proper order, and then you can get going all the way with your deployment by using Zyleap as a managed service. So another use case here for different cloud models for deploying your workloads. The next one is going to be clusters, and clusters just went GA here recently. And what clusters does is takes our same software, so our AOS, our AHV, and we can deploy that on bare metal inside of public cloud. Our first release of this is going to support AWS, but you have the same pane of glass management that you would as on-prem in your private cloud to deploying workloads in the public cloud with clusters on AWS. We will be supporting other clouds later, but our first release is with AWS. The main thing here is that AWS has what they do is their metal instances, their bare metal ones, and they have the proper APIs to where we can go through our portal, our cluster manager portal, and automate the deployment of a cluster, along with being able to hibernate that cluster when it's not in use, and then resume that cluster when you need to use workloads again. Now, think of this the same thing as Nutanix AHV on-prem, but instead of you owning the hardware, you are just managing the software on top of those instances inside of clusters. All the things that we use to protect things like protection domains, files deployments, everything, all that works the same exactly inside of clusters as it would on-prem. The main difference with clusters and Zyleap is that Zyleap is a managed service in our Nutanix data centers, where clusters is you bring your own cloud account, you provision the public cloud, and then you basically just pay for the software for Nutanix, licensing for Nutanix software to be able to deploy things on the public cloud. So this is basically, again, taking the software off of the hardware in your data center, running it in the public cloud the exact same way, except without having to worry about the hardware, the power, the cooling, and all of those things. And again, the first release of this will be AWS, and we'll have excuse me, and we'll have other public cloud providers coming later. So we talk about being able to run across any platform, one platform, any application, any location. That's what we have with Nutanix. Again, we started with the private cloud, but now with being able to provision out the public cloud along with our own managed services for DR, we truly have a multi-cloud experience with Nutanix, and you can manage all this through a single pane of glass using our Prism management services. So that was kind of our intro into Nutanix and how we fit in multi-cloud and the components that we have and how they relate to Citrix. I'm going to tell you now how we actually do our integration with Citrix. So the first thing with Citrix on Nutanix is we support all the hypervisors that is supported by Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops and Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Service. Now, all these integrations I'm going to talk about going forward, I'm going to focus mainly on our hypervisor on AHV that comes bundled with Nutanix when you purchase Nutanix software. So we have our core components, AHV, our hypervisor, AOS is our foundation component, and then Prism is our single pane of glass management. I mentioned our essentials pieces like COM for automation, files for file storage, and NAS type infrastructure for things like profiles and so forth. Flow is going to be, again, our security of VMs, being able to lock down the VM's traffic and only allow them to talk to what they need to talk to and visualize where that traffic's going. And then enterprise, I talked about our Zyleap, our DR as a service, a managed service, and then clusters. We're taking the same AHV, AOS Prism, and be able to deploy that into public cloud. Our integration with AHV is that we have a plugin that you install either on your delivery controllers, if you're running the control plane for Citrix on premises, or you install on the cloud connectors if you're using the cloud control plane of the Virtual Apps and Desktop service. So we have full integration with machine creation services, provisioning services, power management for full clones, again, with the cloud connector for Citrix Cloud. And we also have Director, and I'll talk about all these pieces later on. We do support virtual appliances, so the Application Delivery Controller, or ADC VPX, Application Delivery Management, SD-WAN, and app layering as well. And then for migration, whether it's coming from another hypervisor to AHV or moving back and forth between native AHV and native public cloud like AWS, we have our product called Move to help automate that and take the process to make it really easy for migrating between different hypervisors or cloud providers. And then Nutanix CE, based on AHV, there's all the things that you can do with our plugins, get an environment running up for test, lab, developments type stuff, non-production use, where you can do all of this without having official supported Nutanix hardware you can use commodity hardware in your lab, non-production use. The next thing here is going to be our plugin. Again, it's a combined installer. Make sure you always use the latest, but in the combined installer, the top one is for the control plane for Citrix in your data center on-prem. The middle one is going to be for the cloud connector, so for them hosting the control plane in the cloud, and then the PVS plugin for the virtual apps and desktop setup wizard. The next piece here is going to be the plugin for Director. So when you drill down to a machine level, you will see the actual machine level performance statistics on storage, so IOPS, latency, bandwidth, and so forth, as you drill down inside of Director. The next plugin or piece is going to be Cloud Connect, so we can automate the deployment of the Cloud Connector VMs through our Prism management. Deploy the VMs, install the Cloud Connector, and then once those are up and running, you go through and just deploy the plugin on those, and you're all set up ready to go all through Prism to deploy that from a template on AHV. The next piece is going to be GPU support. So we get a lot of questions around this. So we have full GPU support for NVIDIA, pass-through VGPU, different cards from M10 to M60, P40. Not too long ago, we had support for P4, T4, and V100. And you can see all the management, license allocation, and everything inside of Prism, which you see here. Again, our management piece. So everything, again, is truly one single pane of glass management when it comes to managing different components in the environment that we provide. So I talked about Xileap earlier, our DR as a managed service. We are starting to support that for Citrix. The main thing here is that it's going to be a managed service by us. Now, this is going to be a different plugin that we have from our plugin that you normally deploy for AHV in your data center or for clusters. And so this is a new plugin that's going to support persistent desktops, power management, and machine creation services, and be able to have a managed service DR for Citrix without having to worry about a DR location or managing the DR location. You just manage the VMs, set up your protection policies for things like your delivery controllers, your persistent desktops, your master images. Those get replicated. When a DR happens, those come up, and then you deploy your catalog if you're doing non-persistent on the managed services. Again, it's managed services. We manage everything underneath. You manage the VM and the replication policies, and you have that DR in several different locations that we have around the world. I talked about clusters. And so, again, clusters is going to be the same thing as running Nutanix AHV in your data center, but instead of on your hardware in your data center, we're just taking the software and putting that on bare metal on public cloud providers. The nice thing here is that the same plugins that you use with AHV in your data center will be the same exact plugins that you use inside of clusters. Again, our first release, AWS, but you're going to have that single pane of glass management across the board for this. Supporting full support for full clone desktops, so persistent desktops, MCS non-persistent, PVS as well, and we have some reference architecture guides coming out soon that will show you our testing of clusters with Citrix virtual apps and desktops on top of that. But the nice thing here is our same plugins we have today are just in the same data center. Think of clusters where if you had multiple data centers with Nutanix AHV in it, basically the same thing, same concept, but instead of you owning the hardware is in public cloud, connect up via VPN, direct connect, and then use the same replication pieces that we do for master images, persistent desktops, and so forth to spread those workloads out. Use cases are bursting, disaster recovery, seasonal workers. Think about like now where everyone shifted to work from home, so we had to think about getting extra gear. But instead of having to take that long time of procurement, set it up, make sure you have the proper power, the proper cooling, you can just burst into clusters and be able to get up within an hour and have a cluster running and start replicating workloads over there to start spinning up virtual apps and desktops, machine catalogs with that. So Nutanix and Citrix better together. So we talked about the whole stack, and you'll see how we fit in, help with your Citrix, whether it's in your data center, in the public cloud, or managed service as with DR. So from there, any questions?
Well, hey, Jarian, before we get to that, I've got a quick poll that I'll go ahead. Let me go ahead and get a poll while we're waiting for some of those questions to come in. So, folks, I'm going to go ahead and set a poll out there. All right, so got a couple of questions for you, Jarian, while we're watching that poll come out. So, so one of the things that we noticed for the Nutanix Enterprise clusters was coming out there on AWS. Are there roadmaps for both Azure and GCP, or is there one versus the other? Just to kind of let some of the folks know here.
Yes, that's a great question. And as I mentioned in the presentation, AWS is our first release, and I talked about how AWS has the APIs already in place to do bare metal provisioning. So what we have is called our MCM, or our multi-cluster manager portal. And what that does is allow you to spin up clusters using API. So AWS already had that in place, the bare metal instances and the APIs to be able to orchestrate that. So through that, we go through a portal. We say we want, the four different types they have out there for the instances. Specifically for virtual apps and desktops, we've been testing the i3 instances from AWS. But we go through, you pick the instances, you pick how many nodes you want, you pick your RF level, and you go through and it orchestrates the actual install of all the software. So think of today, if you have Foundation and you're doing your nodes in your data center, it's kind of like a quick Foundation in the cloud that we're using MCM for. So those APIs have to be available, and that's why AWS was first, because they had everything in place for us to do that. Those same APIs allow us to hibernate the cluster. So when you're not needing the cluster and don't want to get billed for the usage, you can hibernate that and shut the nodes down. When you need that capacity again, you can resume the cluster, wake them up, and then also destroy the cluster as well. And again, AWS had all that in place. Now, as for other cloud providers, we are working to get those across multiple cloud providers. Our only thing is we're waiting for those other cloud providers to get the same type of features and functionality in place that AWS has for that bare metal provisioning. That way we can do that. But of course, our plan is to be multi-cloud, and that's where we're going. And you'll see releases of Azure, GCP as they get that capability, as AWS has.
Excellent. Next question we have for you is: are there any plans for clusters plus Horizon View support?
So that's a fun question. So Horizon only supports vSphere/ESXi as a hypervisor. And right now with clusters, we're AHV only. Now, say VMware said we're going to open up Horizon to run on other hypervisors, we definitely could support it. But that's going to be more of support from VMware to run Horizon on AHV. I don't have the answer as far as if we're going to support vSphere with clusters. I don't know at this time. I know right now all of our focus is on AHV for clusters.
And next to one more question is: so is there a difference? I noticed that you had talked about AHV here as a part of your presentation, but can you kind of comment on some of what some of the experiences like for users out there who are leveraging Citrix hypervisor or VMware? I mean, what's the support for that? I mean, how is that experience, and what is that kind of like?
So yes, so we do fully support all four hypervisors that support it with virtual apps and desktops. The majority of our deployments are either AHV or on VMware, on vSphere. So we're seeing the big chunk of our deployments on those two hypervisors. Now, we do support Hyper-V at Nutanix, and we probably have a small percentage of customers using Hyper-V. And then we also probably have a small set of customers running, I'm trying to say XenServer. So there's hypervisor. I keep wanting to say XenServer there. But we do have a small amount of customers too that run those as well. Again, all are supported. One trend we're starting to see though, as customers come on to Nutanix, they're either migrating to AHV or they're going with VMware. So we're not seeing the big chunk of users on Citrix hypervisor or on Hyper-V.
And then two, I noticed one of the questions is, I noticed that with both PBS and MCS, those are the two of the big ones. I mean, a lot of folks have used PBS for a while. What's kind of the sense? I mean, is there a performance boost for PBS versus MCS, or is MCS versus PBS? How does that work when we're doing that machine management on the platform?
Yeah, so one thing that we have in our software is a feature called shadow clones. And shadow clones really make MCS shine and help it scale. So what shadow clones does is basically it's like data locality. So all the reads and writes are local. So when it notices that machines are running on a node, it does a shadow copy of that master image to that node, And so all the reads and writes are local, and that's how we can help MCS scale. So we're not going across the network to, causing unnecessary network traffic. We're not putting a hotspot on one storage node. We're truly distributing the actual load of those on there. And so whether you're VMware or AHV, you're going to get the benefit of shadow clones like functionality on Nutanix. When it comes to PVS, we have no special sauce for that. But for the write cache disk, because of data locality, all the reads and writes for that will be local. But our software really does help MCS scale and MCS perform better with that shadow clones / data locality features. As far as deployments, we see a mixed deployment of those. We have some very large customers running MCS, some very large customers running PVS. We also have some customers that come over running PVS that end up switching to MCS as well. So it just depends on what they want to do. But we fully support both, whether it's on AHV, VMware, Citrix Hypervisor, or Hyper-V.
All right. Well, it looks like I think we've pretty much got all the questions and answered there. So Jarian, so thank you very much. We really appreciate your presentation here at this time. We're going to go ahead and get ready to queue up the